All right, everyone, now it's time for the midterm omnibus because, of course, there aren't that many weeks left. I think 4 weeks, right, until the midterm elections here in the United States. We're definitely all eyes on the Senate at the moment. It's like in the House, almost anything could happen. There are so many races that a few could tip it in either direction, and we've got to look at the polling methodology involved. But in the Senate, things are looking very, very rosy right now for the Republicans. Another seat has moved to safe Republican, Tennessee, I believe, where there's like a 10-point now aggregated differential for the Republicans. Cruz is now basically out of the danger zone. He's averaging 6 or 7 point lead in a state where most people have probably made up their minds right now. Most of the movement you're going to see in a lot of these polls has already been done, unless there's some major October surprise. I think, based on what I'm seeing in Senate polls, the October surprise may very well have been Kavanaugh. And I don't think it worked well for the Democrats. The Republicans have been hammering them. It's working in the Senate polls if we observe them. So now Tennessee looks like it's pretty much safe Republican. That gives them 50 seats. There are 6 toss-ups now and a couple of potential toss-ups, like New Jersey, one of their seats, potentially a toss-up. I think it'll stay Democrat. I think the Democrats are still 4 or 5 points ahead there. In New Jersey, that doesn't say great things polling-wise. But with 6 toss-ups and the Republicans only needing one of them, statistically speaking, I would be surprised. You know, the 50-50, the break-even point at this point would be the Republicans ending up with 53 seats at the end of the night on the midterms. That would be a pretty good showing. That's certainly not a victory for the Democrats. I realize that the actual geographic map of the races that are up favored the Republicans heavily. But if the Republicans are really super unpopular, led by an evil dictator, and just horrible sexist individuals, you'd think that they wouldn't be able to scrape together a situation in which they win any of the toss-ups. There shouldn't be any toss-ups. If the Republicans are really that weak and that demoralized and that evil and wrong, you'd think that the Democrats could at least gain 1 seat and thereby have a tie in the Senate or something. Instead, it looks like the Republicans might get a net 3. At this point, I think the Republicans gain a net of 3 seats over what they've got, which means they'd end up with 53 or 54, somewhere around there. That means that they win as far as the Senate's concerned. Their goal in the Senate is to come away with at least 1 more seat than they have now. Now then, there's one other thing in play. If we believe that there is a differential within polling, like if the differential from the aggregate to the real number was the same as in 2016, the Republicans would walk away with a net gain of 5 or 6, actually. A couple of those, they'd win all the toss-ups, essentially. In fact, they might gain 7 seats. That would be a wipeout for the Republicans. We can't assume that, though. I think part of the reason why the polling aggregates were so wrong in 2016 was differential turnout. I don't think we're going to see sky-high internal enthusiasm among Republicans as much as we did. But there probably is a polling differential. There probably is a systemic polling methodology issue. It's probably in the Democrats' favor, and it's probably more than, a half a point or some tiny amount. It's probably 2 or 3 points overestimation of Democratic support. That is, on midterms night, what do we know? Some of the most perceived, enthusiastic, energized voters are young. Young voters don't turn out to the polls as much. They get really hyped up, and then they're like, yeah, but I want to get drunk. Yeah, but this is on TV. Yeah, but I want to sit here and watch the midterm results come in live and blog about it. And so you could see some of that Democratic support literally dry up. And also, you've got to understand, if we're assuming that this is just a temporary surge in Republican support, early voting's already going on in some of these places. Well, that certainly takes Texas probably off the table. Looks like Tennessee would be off the table. That alone, those 2 races determine whether the Republicans can even lose the Senate. At this point, it looks like there's no way they can actually lose there unless polling were systemically overestimating Republicans by 4 or 5 points. Do we actually believe that that's likely? I don't. Not in a million years. Meanwhile, we're looking at the House. So in the Senate, I'd say there's a 99% chance the Republicans hold the Senate. There's at least an 80-90% chance that they come away with the extra seat or 2. And a pretty good chance, better than 50-50, they get a 3rd. That would be a win for them. So they should be optimistic in the Senate. They should work hard, but they should be optimistic at this point, assuming that the polling stays roughly where it is now. It could move before Election Day. You got to realize we still do have several weeks left in campaigning. There could be some massive scandal. Ted Cruz is actually secretly a serial killer or something. He gets knocked out of the race. Something like that happens. Or it could be in their favor. Yeah, and we see the possibility of Keith Ellison getting his own October surprise right now. As far as presidential approval, it's holding roughly steady, 43 to 44. It's in that same general scope. It has been remarkably stagnant, remarkably static for a very, very long time, other than one statistical blip there that literally had to do with bad polling, that had to do with outlier polls being released in short order, which happened, I think, a month ago. And I correctly predicted that that was just a blip. It showed, oh, systemic collapse of Trump support. And I was like, no, that's not what it shows. This shows that several outlier polls that are only rarely conducted happen to be conducted over the same short span of time, dragging the aggregate down by 4 or 5 points. That's what you're seeing. Then shot right back up, proving the point. Trump might not hit the 45 mark. What does that mean? It means less than a 50-50 chance of the Republicans holding the House. At this point, the House is looking very iffy for the Republicans. Now, how much do they lose it by? Because that kind of matters too. If the Democrats come away with a 1-seat majority in the House, it's not exactly a mandate to do everything they want to do. By the way, I think Trump cares less, because some of those Democrats in the House are willing to work across the aisle. In the Senate, that's where the obstruction has been. The Senate continuously has obstructed everything Trump's wanted to do while being led by Republicans, including Kavanaugh himself, and a very, very important event that I think at this point Trump allowed to be dragged out with the FBI investigation specifically because he figured the Democrats would overextend and make themselves look dumb, which is what they did. He rope-a-doped them. He actually allowed them to conduct a cursory and largely symbolic investigation to demoralize the far left while making the far right mad so that they turn out more for the midterms. And since early voting's already going on, you can bet some of those people are folks that are like, I'm so mad, I'm going to cast my vote now because, I mean, what if I have pneumonia on election night? Fuck that. And even if they did, they'd probably still go. I think at this point, the Republicans' chances of holding the House are less than 50-50. Again, with the possibility of poll movement, you've got to understand, there will probably be, and it will probably be in the Republicans' direction. We could have a situation where it's almost impossible to tell because it's basically a 50-50 chance. I think even in Nate Silver's projection, he's giving the Republicans a bit more leeway in both the House and Senate races now. In the Senate, I think he's giving them like an 83% chance of winning in the Senate, holding the Senate. I think it's more than that. I think he's severely underestimating their chances in the Senate. But Trump's approval, while not great, is still technically, it's certainly not harming them in the Senate. He's campaigning openly for some of these people. They're doing quite well. Like Ted Cruz will almost certainly be reelected. I think it's Blackburn in the open Utah race, I think, is handily ahead of Bredesen there, I think by 10 points or something. That's not really on the table. Now, we've got some other races that now are very close to being toss-ups. Most of them are toss-ups now, or nearly so, because they're moving away from the Democrats. Now, keep in mind, though, that's just the Senate. The Senate confirms SCOTUS appointees and other people that Trump wants to appoint. That is extremely important that the Republicans want to control the Senate, preferably with room to spare. In the House, it's less important with everything except for the fact that the House controls the purse strings, which means budgeting for the wall might be a little bit difficult. But the thing is, Trump might be able to negotiate with a couple of Democrats there and get that funding thrown in above and beyond the Republicans, in exchange for maybe easing up on some of the deregulation or something. And again, he'll do the thing where he makes a big ask, comes away with a little bit of what he asked for, and technically gains victory in so doing. He's good. I think he'd rather not have to do that, but he is capable of defaulting to that mode of behavior as he has before. It's just it'll slow down, certainly, progress. And that'll be a big issue in 2020. If he hasn't made any further progress on building a wall, it is going to become a campaign issue. One that the Democrats can't really capitalize on because, what would they do? They'd be like, well, tear down the existing border fence and get rid of ICE entirely. And he'll hammer them on it. And he'll make the case. Prediction for 2020. Assuming immigration is an issue at all, which it probably will be, at least to some extent. He'll come out and say, well, I was obstructed continuously. They wouldn't appropriate money for it, including some members of my own party, because they're afraid, essentially. I wanted to give you the wall, and Mexico's already paying for it in terms of trade deal negotiations and relief on tariffs and stuff, which is basically what he wanted. Whether or not his core audience will accept that, I think, remains to be seen. I'm surprised that Trump's not talking more about foreign policy, especially the fact that ISIS is basically now an afterthought on the world stage. You haven't heard much about Islamic terrorism lately, now have you? Well, you should be taking more credit for that. Hey, I'm the law and order guy. They're all goofballs, basically. And North Korea, he needs to talk more about that as well. That's about all. Peace out.